Dixie here. Today I'd like to share some tips for hiking and backpacking with children. I know some of y'all are probably like, but Dixie, you don't have any children of your own. And no, I haven't been fortunate enough to have any yet. However, I remember what it was like to be a kid in Girl Scouts and my mom was my leader, or when she would take me out hiking. And also once I grew up and was a leader for my younger sisters. So when I would take my troop out to do outdoor activities. And finally, I asked y'all on my social media platforms on Instagram and Facebook if you had experience hiking and backpacking with your children, if you wouldn't mind sharing some tips. So I have compiled all of that information today into a list of 10 tips for getting out and enjoying some time on trail with your children. As a side note, if you're interested in following some of the social media platforms of people who do go out and hike or backpack or even through hikes, so really long backpacking trips with their children, I'm going to put some resources for some of those families in the video description. So make sure to check those out because they actually have firsthand experience with their own children. Tip number 1 is snacks. I think every parent who left a comment with a list of personal experiences stressed the importance of having snacks. And one suggestion was to have something on trail that your children don't normally get to have off trail, so it makes trail time more special. Or you can mix up the different snacks, maybe allow them to pick out the snacks they want to take, but it doesn't only have to be limited to on-trail snacks. You can also offer a special treat when they get done, or maybe, as one guy said, bribery of going to an ice cream shop once they get done with the hike. I think my parents could pretty much talk me into anything when I was little if I knew that afterwards we were going to get some ice cream. Number 2, start with shorter distances. You want this experience to be something that you ease into. So a 10-miler, your first day hike out, is probably not the best idea. And it might even be a good idea to start with something like car camping to get your kids used to the idea of sleeping outside, sleeping in a tent. And then from there, you could even set up a base camp type thing where you do little day hikes and continue to build up into even an overnight backpacking trip. As you start transitioning into longer trips, it's not a bad idea to check for bailout points just in case things don't go quite as planned or the kids actually aren't into that long of a trip. And it's really not a bad idea to check for bailout points as an adult in case of an emergency. Tip number 3 is plan for good weather. Obviously, you should be prepared if you do run into some not so perfect weather, but when you're going on your first outings with your children, you probably want to try to avoid weather that's way too hot, way too cold, or stormy. That way they don't have a first bad experience and then dread going back out. And this should probably really be extended to planning for the best conditions in general. So nothing too buggy either, because being torn up by mosquitoes on your first trek would probably not make for a memorable experience either. Tip number 4 is have a distinct destination and promote it. Promote it before you go, while you're walking there. And if your kids are old enough to pick what kind of adventure they'd like to have, that'll help give them some ownership over the situation. So whether it's a waterfall or a canyon, a summit, a certain bridge or landmark, whatever it is, you want to talk about, how cool that spot is, and hopefully it actually is cool. But kids love stuff like that. They like to explore, so maybe even old ruins, but just something that has a particular end goal. Tip number 5 is make camp as fun as possible. And this could even tie into tip number 4, where your distinct destination is camp because you have so much fun there. So it makes it a great and exciting goal for the end of the day. Some ways that you can make camp fun are have a fire, have some s'mores over the fire, because who doesn't love s'mores, or even just roasting marshmallows in general. Some parents like to allow their children to have a toy or two from home, and camp is the time where they're allowed to pull those toys out and play with them. Or even if you designate your children certain chores at camp, but make them kind of fun. So gathering firewood, or one of my favorite things to do when we were camping in a more luxurious way and had picnic tables, is to make a centerpiece for the table from nature. So maybe a stick and a pine cone and some moss or pretty leaves. And then, of course, what do they say? Leave footprints and take only memories. So once we were done with that, I'd put it back out in the woods. But allowing your children to just have as much fun at camp as they can so they look forward to it after a long day of hiking. Tip number 6 is let them have their own stuff. So of course this is going to vary depending on what activity you're doing, if you're day hiking, if you're going on a longer backpacking trip, but letting a child have their own pack and maybe water and snacks, just enough that they feel like it's important and they've got their own gear and they're a part of it. But from what I hear, there is a fine line, especially in backpacking, and having your children carry too much stuff so they don't enjoy their experience and they kind of dread it in the future, but also not allowing them to carry enough to where you're really loaded down and you're kind of grumpy because you have so much weight on you, so you're kind of putting a damper on the experience too. Again, that will definitely vary depending on you and your children and what's right for your family, but just something to think about ahead of time. So for day hikes, you could start off light, and then as you transition to longer day hikes and overnight backpacking trips, you can let them have more and more of their own gear. For example, if your child is old enough and mature enough to have their own tent or other form of shelter, even though they could potentially still fit in your 2-person tent, allowing them that freedom and independence is probably pretty exciting for them. Tip number 7 is play games and use your imagination. You could do things like a scavenger hunt, nature bingo, counting how many different birds or snakes or wildlife in general that you see. One cool suggestion that somebody mentioned they do with their children is if somebody hears an animal sound, then the kids try to mimic that and sound as close to it as possible, or maybe even talk about the identification of what that animal was. And there was one other really neat suggestion, and that was to have a Happy Hiker Award for picking up either the most trash or the coolest trash. And that way you're teaching children not to litter in nature, leave no trace principles, and they get excited about picking up trash and toting it out. So they're caring about leaving things better than how they found them. And this person said that sometimes what they'll do with their children is whoever finds that most trash or coolest trash, they get to pick where to go for ice cream or some sort of after hike treat when they get done. It was pretty neat because the mom said that the coolest piece of trash they found so far is a cast iron skillet, and they cleaned it up and they actually use it at home now. Tip number 8 is use technology in a positive way in nature. So I know some folks don't get into backpacking before they have children, and maybe they don't even get into backpacking until they have like preteens and teenagers. So it's hard to kind of pry them away from technology and try to get them out into the woods. And I'm sure if those people could have it their way, they would have started off earlier in the outdoors with their children and kind of gotten them used to maybe not having technology in the outdoors. But I really feel like there is a positive spin on it. Instead of making going on a backpacking trip a miserable thing and saying, I'm taking all of your electronics away and you're not allowed to have that out here, so they dread going, you can use it in a way that's maybe a little bit different, like teaching them to navigate using GPS with apps like AllTrails, GutHook, etc. Or you could have a contest each day of who takes the coolest picture. So now they're paying attention in nature and trying to capture cool experiences. Maybe they even get into photography because of that. And now you have a lot of pictures and potentially video clips that you can combine and make a cool slideshow or a video each time y'all go out and have a backpacking or hiking experience together. Number 9 is permitting activities that are otherwise forbidden. So by this I mean things like whittling sticks, building a fire, climbing rocks and trees, throwing rocks into a puddle. These are all things that children are often told you're not allowed to do that, especially at school or pretty much everywhere in the real world. But these tendencies are natural for children. They want to do things like this. But under your guidance, and of course, depending on their level of maturity and their age, etc., being able to do these things in the outdoors will help them make wiser decisions with these things, but will also make hiking and backpacking more fun because they get to do this stuff. Finally, tip number 10 is focus on making memories, not miles. I think a lot of parents will decide, okay, as a family, we're going hiking or backpacking and we've got X goals in mind and we're gonna get there and we're gonna knock it out and that's just the way it's gonna be. But I think if folks would just slow down and allow themselves to just focus on having fun with their children, that it would be a more enjoyable experience for everybody. So plan to be flexible and take a lot of breaks. Sometimes your kids might just want to explore an area where you're taking a break. So maybe the day hike doesn't actually end at the summit because you run out of time, but that's okay, because if they have fun and they willingly want to go back next time, you're probably going to be better served than if you do make it to the summit and they have a miserable time and now they're kicking and screaming and don't want to go back. Also in this, I wanted to mention that at least if I had my own children, I would like to think that when I go out and go camping or hiking, backpacking with them, that I slow down more so out on trail than in normal life, because I feel like people get in such a hurry in our day-to-day lives that we don't take time to slow down and teach children things properly. We're like, oh, just move, I'll do it myself, and you know, we're in a rush. But maybe on trail, focusing on actually taking the time to teach your children how to do things like setting up camp or building a fire or whatever other skills y'all do, hanging a bear bag. But for me personally, I just think that if I have my own children, creating this human and then watching them hopefully share my love of the outdoors and teaching them to care for the environment and teaching them these skills that now they can pass on to their children, I don't know. I just feel like that's how we create a world of people where we care about one another, we care about relationships with each other, protecting the environment and the places that we love to explore. So anyway, I think it's just important to be flexible and take your time. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today on hiking and backpacking with children. If you've got any tips that work for you and you've got experience in that field, or if you want to share any resources that I did not leave in the video description, then please feel free to do that in the comments below, because it could definitely help somebody who's just starting to adventure in the outdoors with their children. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go if you haven't already, and we will see y'all next time.
Oh, there you go.